Rolling.
Hello, my name is Jackie Geringer McDermott, and we are recording live from the English Valleys History Center in North English, Iowa. It is January 18th, 2025. This diary or journal was written by my great-great-aunt, Mary Elizabeth Claypool Wade, who was known as Libby Wade. Here's a picture of Libby with her family. She's sitting beside the Model A or Model T, whatever it is, old car, beside her dad, Jonathan Claypool, out on their farm. She was my grandmother's aunt and the matriarch of our very, very large family. Libby lived a half a block east of Main Street in a little house on Oak Street in North English, Iowa, until near the end of her life in 1959. She was 71 years old in 1946. I don't remember her, but she knew me as a baby. Downtown North English was also the center of my life as I grew up. I would like to introduce you page by page to the cast of characters from North English, Iowa, and the surrounding English Valleys area. April 15th, 1946. Cool. Frost predicted here tonight. Verdi was here, also Maud C. Mrs. Boltz came home today. Verdi Hannah McKinstry was her friend. Maud Claypool is the wife of Libby's nephew, Ray Claypool. Mrs. Elizabeth, or Lizzie Boltz, is an 85-year-old friend who, according to the newspaper, has spent the winter in San Diego with her family and now is back in Iowa. April 16th, 1946. Nice today. Mary R. was here. Also, Mrs. Boltz called me a while. Preparations going on tonight at the hall. Russell saw the English bride of Bob Davisson, who arrived here recently. There's a picture of Mary Reg Seger. She's the younger person in this picture. She was her egg lady and neighborhood friend. And tonight at the International Order of Odd Fellows Hall, or the IOOF Hall, on the second story of the brick building at the end of the block on Main Street, will be the meeting of Libby's club, the Rebeccas. Russell is Libby's 38-year-old son who lives in the house with her. Freda Davisson was from England, and Bob Davisson met her and married her, and they raised their large family of boys in North English. I found a nice article that came from the Ottumwa paper about the former Freda Sanger, who had recently married Bob Davisson, who had been stationed in England. Freda had been a former member of the service in England, similar to our Women's Army Corps, and had WACS, and had arrived here on Army Day last week. She was settling in here and making a garden while her husband works at the bank. I remember Freda. She was a lovely, sweet woman. And we have a large display here in the History Center about her. And if you'll notice right behind me, this is her silk wedding dress from her wedding in England in 1945 to Bob. And here's the picture of it. On top is Freda and Bob Davisson. And then over here is a picture of her in her Army Corps outfit. She was a telegrapher and worked the night of D-Day. She was working that evening. Down the corner is a picture of her boys, Dale and Gary and Glenn. They played football at EV. Freda was just a very, very sweet person. April 17th, 1946. The program was very good last night. About 150 present. 2 charter members that have kept their memberships, Vina Baker and Josephine Brown. Mary Bear did not attend. She was also a charter member. Mrs. Ida Ferris and Mrs. Elsie Reams of Fairfield had also been charter members. Josephine Brown was the mother of Mace Brown, the famous baseball player here from North English. We'll have a story on him someday. April 18th, 1946. Clear and bright. Cooler than yesterday. Russell went to CR. I washed kitchen curtains. Mrs. Bursler was here and brought me a dahlia bulb. Mary R. was here in the PM. I received a letter from Anna and an Easter card from Alta. Mr. Alberts found in the Cedar River. His home was in Millersburg. Mrs. Ruth Bursler is the daughter of her friend Clara Newberry. Libby loves all sorts of flowers, so a dahlia bulb would be a nice gift. Anna Cray was her daughter in Texas. Alta Wade Berry was her sister-in-law, the sister of her husband, Bert Wade. And Frank Albert, I looked in the newspaper about that. Frank Albert was the father of Albert Layer, or Bosty Albert, who will soon be marrying Rita Van D from North English. Their family later moved to Texas, but visited family here in North English in the summer when I was growing up. Good Friday, April 19th, 1946. Beth was here. Vaughn brought her over. Jenny was here a little while. She is planting her garden. It is very warm, 80 degrees at 2 p.m. Received an Easter card from Anna. Beth Mall Holmes was Libby's niece, the daughter of her sister, Sarah Myrtle Claypool Mall and John Josiah Mall. Vaughn is Beth's husband, and they live in Kyoto. Jenny, that's planting the garden, is Libby's daughter-in-law, the wife of her oldest son, Wayne. April 20th, 1946. Cleaned the house and baked cookies in the a.m. Hattie was here, also Martha Sears and Bertha. Hattie Newberry Killian was her 55-year-old neighbor and friend, and Martha Sears was a friend. She was the grandmother of my friend, Kathy O'Rourke. Bertha Claypool Geringer is Libby's niece, the daughter of her brother Benton and my paternal grandmother. Easter Sunday, April 21st, 1946. Russell went to church. In the p.m., we went to South English, stopped to visit Mr. and Mrs. Huff, and then went to Carl's to inquire where J.T. lives. Went over there a while. Came back by the way of the Cuba Ponds. Got some Dutchman's breeches for her wildflower garden. Russell took Libby for an outing in his car to South English. They stopped to see Will and Alice Huff. There's a picture of Mr. and Mrs. Huff. They lived up on the hill on Summit Street when I was a child. Then they went to Carl Claypool's. Carl Claypool is right here. He's the grandson of Libby's uncle, Samuel Claypool, and his wife, Mary Tabor Claypool. Carl was the father of Leroy Claypool, who worked at Eldon's Food Market in later years. There's a picture of them when they're in 1950. Carl was the father of Leroy Claypool, who worked at Eldon's Food Market for many years, and Leroy was the first husband of Reva Gilchrist Claypool Wyatt, who lived in North English for a long time. J.T. Claypool that she's talking about is John Tabor Claypool. This was Carl's father and Libby's 87-year-old first cousin. He's this one down here in this corner. These other people are Margaret Claypool Carter, Lou Claypool Pettibone, and William Nelson Claypool. They were Libby's first cousins. JT was 87 years old, and they stopped to see him because he'd evidently come back in this area to live. I had forgotten about the Cuba pits, or the Cuba ponds, as Libby called them. There was a back way out of South English that went to North English. You drove past where Frank Mertz lives now, and then the road went across the river, and there were two ponds that you drove between, located just south of where Lyle Evans lives now. Maybe someone can explain that area better than me. And Dutchman's breeches that she got for her garden, that's a wildflower, also called a bleeding heart, that Libby wants to plant in her wildflower garden. I talked to my brother Lou, who lived in Libby's house in the 1970s. He says that he thinks the garage Russell is building in 1946 must have been over by what was called the Implement Building, owned by Miller Hardware, where the apartment building now stands. Russell's garage was not there when Lou lived there in the 1970s, so maybe it was torn down when the apartment building was built. We're not sure. We looked on the 1954 aerial map that Scott Romine just posted, and it looks like there's a building just east of Miller's Implement Building. The storage sheds are now where Libby's house is located now. The storage sheds are now there, where Libby's house was located. And as Lou remembers it, there was a large garden to the east side of her house. Does anyone know for sure? April 22nd, 1946. Rosa's birthday. I worked in the garden in the a.m. Mrs. Shute and Leona came. After dinner, Otis was here. He is working for the county now. Sent for some geraniums to plant. Maud C. and Stella Wallace were here in the p.m. Jenny brought the trays. A good rain in the p.m. Rosa Carter Claypool was Libby's sister-in-law, the wife of her late brother Benton Claypool, and my paternal great-grandmother. Jessie Shute and her daughter Leona Glantz were friends of Libby's. Otis Claypool was her nephew that came to visit today. He's the son of Benton and Rosa Carter Claypool and the brother of my paternal grandmother, Bertha Claypool Geringer. He drove equipment for Iowa County for many years. Otis is the younger one on the left side here. And then down in the other pictures, he's on this one right here. Oh. It sounds like Libby placed an order for some flowers by mail. Stella Wallace was her friend and the mother of Libby's daughter-in-law, Lena Wallace Wade. I think the trays that Jenny is bringing are the type that hold a coffee cup and have a space for a dessert. Libby is having a function at her house tomorrow, so she will need those trays for coffee and dessert for her guests. April 23rd, 1946. Fair and cooler. Booster class met here. Mrs. Wymore, Brown, Roller, Ginther, Van Aken, Knipfer, Popham, Long, McKinstry, Newberry, Killian, Miller, Penn, and Morse. Other callers were Lena, Jenny, Belva, Mary R., Mrs. Bolts, and Dorothy Fay Orndorff and children. 14 women attended the church class at Libby's house that day. Also, her two daughters-in-law, Lena and Jenny Wade, visited today, and granddaughter Belva Yoss, and her friends Mary Reg Sager and Mrs. Lizzie Bolts, and Dorothy Van Dyke Orndorff and her children, one of whom, if she was born by April 23, 1946, was likely my faithful listener, Vicki Orndorff Johnson. April 24, 1946. Warmer, a lovely day. Russell went to CR. My back hurts. Stella was here. They're putting in a furnace today. Mrs. Bolts was here in the p.m., Hattie in the evening. Russell started putting up the clothesline. Got one post set. Russell often travels to Cedar Rapids for his work with the Home Lumber Company. My back would hurt too if I had 14 people at my house for club. Stella Wallace is the mother of Libby's daughter-in-law, Lena Wade Wallace Wade. The Wallaces have just moved from the farm to town as her husband Roy was very, very ill earlier this spring and has since recovered and retired. April 25th, 1946. Fair, nice day. Cool in the morning. Cool enough in the house for a fire. Ronnie mowed the grass at noon. Verdi was here in the p.m. Bob Geringer was here for a while after school. Russell went to Fairfield for IOOF meeting. The meeting was about 8 minutes from Fairfield at Pierce. Hattie was here. My pictures are out of order. Well, how did I do that? I don't know what I did with my pictures. I'm going to go on. Oh, there they are. Ronnie Claypool was a school kid who mowed her yard. Bob Geringer was my uncle, who was a grade school age kid also. He's the younger guy in the front right here. This one here. Russell went to, or Bob was likely looking for a cookie or something cold to drink or some conversation with his great aunt. Russell went to IOOF, or International Order of Odd Fellows meeting, which is similar to Libby's Rebecca's Lodge. April 26, 1946. Cool again. Frost predicted for tonight. About like 46 years ago. It was cold then too. Heavy frost that morning. Had a letter from Anna today. They were picking tomatoes, lots of them. They picked $1,000 worth in 2.5 hours. I went down to Wayne's for a while. While I was away, Maud and Bertha were here. Maud came later. Ronnie was here, and Russell put up the clothesline. 46 years ago was the day that Libby got married. April 27th, 1946. I used the new Maytag for the first time. I like it fine. Maud was here, Hattie, Ronnie in the evening. It's quite cold. I have a fire in the oil heater. April 28th, 1946. Russell got up early and went fishing. Russell went fishing with Roy Cox. Had fish for breakfast. I went to Wayne's. Elsie and Harvey, and Luella and Derlin, and Bernice, and Evelyn and Wayne and Sue, and Hazel and Glenn were there, and also Belva and Don, who live in part of the house. Had a nice visit. Freda was there too. The relatives at Wayne's that day were her nephew, Jaunty Claypool's ex-wife, Elsie, and her husband, Harvey Parker, who live in Iowa City. Libby's great nieces, Bernice Claypool, and here's a picture of Bernice. This is her right here, and she's the oldest kid in this picture here. And her sister was Luella Claypool Bailey, and her husband Dooley Bailey. Here's a picture of them. They're the married couple there. They were visiting from out of state, so that's why everybody was down at Wayne's. Also, her granddaughters, Evelyn, Hazel, and Belva. This is the picture of the Wayne Wade family. All the girls were there that day with their husbands, and little Suzanne Kurtz, of course, and Bud's wife, Freda Wade, were also present to see the visitors. April 29th, 1946, Lena's birthday. Nice today, a heavy fog earlier, then clear. I washed again today. Belva here brought a coat to alter from the store for Dawn. Mary R. was here. She had a picture of Fred she just got at Williamsburg. Wayne and Jenny went to Jaunty's. They took Lyle. Lena's her daughter-in-law, the wife of her middle son, Warren or Mike Wade. Don Yass, Belva's husband, works at Carson's clothing store uptown. So Belva and or Libby are altering a coat for a customer at the store. Mary Regsager's husband was named Fred. Her son, Wayne, and wife, Jenny, went to Brooklyn, Iowa to see his cousin, Jaunty Claypool. There's a picture of Jaunty right here. And Jaunty was my grandma Bertha Claypool Geringer's older brother. Jaunty's girls, Bernice and Luella, were there from out of state, and her husband, Dooley Bailey, were in Iowa, so they probably went there to see them again, and they took their friend Lyle Furman with them. April 29th, 1946. Mrs. Huxford died. I also heard that Mattie Agson died Saturday night. The funeral's tomorrow at Champion Hill. Mrs. Owen Huxford was a woman from the area, and Mattie Agson was an old neighbor from the Green Valley area. She was the maternal grandmother of my aunt Shirley Geringer, as Mattie Agson was her grandma, was Bessie Dennison's mother. Champion Hill is a Protestant church north and east of North English that still stands. April 30th, 1955. Russell went to Cedar Rapids. I ironed a while and then went to Hazel's with Jenny, Belva, and Lyle. It was quite cold. Mr. and Mrs. Cray came home from Texas. She called me in the evening. Hazel Cobb is Libby's young married granddaughter who lives out in the country. And Mr. and Mrs. Cray were the parents of Richard Cray, Libby's son-in-law in Texas, that is married to daughter Anna. They live at Wellman and had just returned home. This is the end of the diary portion of the program for this week. Dave Jackson has written a book called Won't You Take Me to Hinkletown? The History of Hickory Ridge School in Hinkletown, Iowa. For those of you that do not know, Hinkletown is east of North English and then south of the highway. Green Valley is north of the highway. Opal Ballard Bertram Grove wrote a story of her life, of the life of her parents, which is included in this book. For this full story and lots of pictures and other data, please see Won't You Take Me to Hinkletown by Dave Jackson. Opal was the daughter of John Newton Ballard Jr. and his wife, Bertha Riffle Ballard. Their children were Eunice Ballard Polton, Rena Ballard Summers, May Ballard Grove, Ruth Ballard Rochin, Ralph Ballard, Floyd Ballard, Dorothy Ballard, Elsie Ballard, and Iva Ballard Ewing. After her father's death in 1924, Opal's mother raised the children by herself and was a widow for nearly 45 years. I myself do not remember Bertha Ballard other than hearing my parents speak of her. Many years ago, Bertha's granddaughter, Dorothy Polton Fulbert, the daughter of Eunice Ballard Polton, called me and asked me to come see her, as she knew I was a genealogist and was working on the Geringer family ancestry, so we needed to coordinate our efforts. It turns out that Bertha's married name was Riffle, and she was originally from the Watchir area. Her mother's name was Melvina Good, and her father was Thomas Riffle. Melvina Good's parents were William and Sarah Geringer, who were originally from northern Missouri, the same as my great-grandpa Geringer. So the Geringers and the Goods came up to Iowa around 1900 and have been here ever since. Even more people around here that I'm related to. Back to the story of John Newton Ballard Jr. and his wife Bertha Riffle Ballard. Their daughter Opal Ballard Bertram and Dave Jackson constructed a storyboard to tell about their life. Bertha and her husband were married in 1903 and had 11 children. John's parents had moved to Oklahoma, so the young married couple followed them there in a covered wagon in the hopes of a better life, and their first 2 children were born there. I have the storyboard. I'm going to show it to you, and then I'm going to put it back down so that I can talk. This is a picture of John Newton Ballard on the top, and then Bertha's picture in her older years is right there. And then over on this side are some pictures of the kids, all the children together with their dad, and then a picture of her with a big hawk. And then there's a picture of her when she was younger. As I said before, Eunice and Ina were born in Oklahoma. In 1907, hearing that land could be settled in New Mexico, they traveled in a covered wagon to Tucumcari, New Mexico, and lived in a tent. Their son Ralph was born there in February of 1908. The sand was carried by strong winds, and life was not pleasant, so they packed up and headed back to Iowa. John was very sick with a fever on the journey home, so on the journey home, Bertha had to drive the horses and hold baby Ralph on a pillow, as the jostling was not good for the baby. The trip took 43 days. Once they were back in Iowa, 8 more children were born, and in 1924, John Newton Ballard Jr. took his own life. The family were survivors and learned to trap and hunt and fish to survive, as well as farming with horses. Bertha became somewhat of a legend in these parts because she raised about 600 chickens, knew how to use a gun to shoot all sorts of wild game, canned about 1,000 quarts of fruit jars each year, and sewed all the girls' clothes. She baked 24 loaves of bread at one time and brought home 48 bags of flour each year. She was also legendary because she went barefooted outside in the summertime and could scramble to the top of high places. She was known for her home remedies and common sense ways. One of her daughters said, "Mother can do anything. There will never be another like her. She could build a barn, husk corn, shoot a fox, and catch fish. She raised 11 children alone. God bless her." 3 of her daughters died at ages 16, 17, and 23, And as the obituary of her daughter Iva stated, after the tragedy of the death of the father, the children showed a fine spirit of cooperation. There was much to do, and each did his part as the family endeavored to face adjustments when such a tragedy occurs. Bertha lived to the ripe old age of 89 and stayed out in the country as long as she could, fishing and enjoying nature. Bertha Ballard's granddaughter, Dorothy Polton Fobert, was a friend of mine and a fellow genealogist. I was also friends with Dorothy's son, Jerry Fobert, who farmed while working in a manor refrigeration for 36 years. He was an avid hunter, fisherman, mushroom hunter, and outdoorsman in the same style as his great-grandmother, Bertha Ballard. I was friends with Randy Fobert, and I love his children, Michael and Amy, and their children. Bertha's sons, Ralph and Floyd, were also farmers, outdoorsmen, and hunters. I have recently become acquainted with Ralph's daughter, Louise Ballard Davis, because of my broadcasts. I knew Opal's 4 girls, especially Mary and Debbie, who were my age. There was also Susan and Patty. Susan's daughter, Tracy Mason, is a listener to my weekly stories. Our lovely homecoming queen from English Valleys High School, Carla Grove, was Bertha's granddaughter, the daughter of May Ballard Grove. Correspondence that I've heard from people this week. Scott Romine says, as always, Jackie, I greatly enjoyed your broadcast. It made me smile when you mentioned the Holton boys working on the garage in 1946. Just 42 years later, Otis and Milford Holton built our garage on Cherokee Hill. Before that project, they also completed 3 other projects on our home. Yes, they also built the kitchen cabinets in my parents' home up on Summit Street many years ago, and their names signed in them. Beth Hoylman Henning writes, so interesting. Thank you for doing this, Jackie. My friend that I'm not related to, even though her maiden name was Keller, from Belle Plaine, Judy Keller Sesselman says, I love Libby's hat. I heard from Bill Weber from Riverside, and he said, yes, please continue. Louise Ballard Davis writes, you do an amazing job. Keep it up. I enjoy listening to you every Sunday morning. Listening to both sides of my family stories is a plus. Please keep the stories coming. Janet Cobb Woodhouse writes, I love the info on Art Carter and the milk deliveries. I remember him delivering milk to my grandma Lila Cobb. As a farm kid, I thought that was too cool. We had small bottles of milk at the elementary school as an afternoon snack, if my memory serves me right. I also wonder if Art delivered them. Mark Claypool says, Jackie, it certainly warms the heart and soul to remember the part we have all played in our community and you keeping the past alive once again. Mark also talked about delivering milk for Art Carter when he was in high school and delivering to Lila Cobb on Saturdays when she would always have a baked treat for him. Vera Dye says she remembers Joe Stroman Jr. and Mark Claypool delivering milk when they were in high school. I saw my cousin Buck Geringer at the Watcher Methodist Church where we attend, and he said he did not realize that our Aunt Marlene Newberry Geringer was a local gal, as their family lived in Springville, Cedar Rapids, and Marion in later years. Vicki Orndorff Johnson writes, the January 11th program was very interesting. I believe my mother, Dorothy Van Dyke Orndorff, worked for Beth Holmes in Kyoto in the mid-1950s. I was fortunate to attend the new grade school the year it was open. The 2 teacher names I remember are Miss Bender, I believe she became engaged that year, and I also remember a teacher by the name of Smothers. You mentioned the Smothers Lockridge last week. I was curious about both of them. I was probably in 2nd or 3rd grade. Vicki was in the class of 1963, and she moved when she was in 3rd grade. Alice Floring Stramer says, the next English Valleys alumni lunch will be February 24th, 2025 at 11:30 at Bryant's in Williamsburg Mall. Please contact Alice or Linda Holden Carter if you will be attending. Pam Kavanaugh Shield says, great broadcast as usual, Jackie. Thank you for all you do to share the information with the viewers, myself included. It reminds me of reading a book. I can't wait until the next chapter. Vince Holman said, you do a great job, Jackie. We still plan on to do a history of the History Center, but for today, we're going to start with a short walk through the building to show what is here. I'm going to apologize in advance if we move the camera too quickly. We're going to head for the front door, and then we'll go from there. Okay, we're starting at the front door, and the front door looks much the same as it did when this place was a grocery store. I'm going to show that. The checkout counter was right here as I remember. After that, I don't remember so much, but maybe some of you do. I do know that we parked alongside the building, and that parking was eliminated when the meat locker was added. First, we'll go down past the chairs that are set up for programming, and back to this display of town memorabilia. There's a lot of stuff in these racks that we'll be going through over the years. Over here are the costumes from the IOF Lodge, and there's also information about the Rebecca Lodge where Libby attended. So I really can't wait to explore about all this. Since I've started the diary, I'm more interested. And where we started out the broadcast this morning is called the Veterans Room. It was made possible by a grant from the Northeast Iowa Community Foundation. There are all sorts of military uniforms in this room. And back here is the meat locker, which is a storeroom now. Dave Jackson pointed out to us that the walls are thick and insulated and it stays cold in here. Now we're going to head over to the other side. Around this way, there's pictures on the walls. There's a big display on John Evans. And pictures of all sorts of people are around here. Get out of the way. You see all these pictures, beautiful pictures on the wall. Dave Jackson colorized a lot of them. We'll be going through a lot of these pictures we talked about. Here's a picture of the actual building. There's Opal. And here's the podium where the speakers speak. And back on the wall, there's more pictures, including the pictures of the star. And there's a picture over here of 100 people from North English over the years. We'll go through that again someday, too. Then as we come in the back, this is the kitchen part. There's pictures on the walls in here. All these pictures were donated by the different families around the area. The one I always pick out of my grandparents, it's on the wall in here. There's Wilkersons, Cheney's, O'Brien's, Chittick's. There's just all sorts of Hogendorns, all sorts of families in here. Down here, there's the history of the Fortnightly Club. We'll do that in depth someday. Over here is the statue the statue of E.D. Baird, the first, the banker from 1932. Then back in this area, there's more storage and computer room. And then back here are the class composites, all the different classes, and there's maps. There's a lot to see here if you're looking for something. Then there's old desks and books. And then there's uniforms and sweaters. All these were donated by the people that used them, had them. And that's one thing, we're always looking for donations. Lots of people's letters up there on the top. And down here, there are yearbooks. I think we have probably most of the yearbooks. All of them. We've got all of them. There's a replica of the school. The 1913 building, they call it. And the band uniforms, the early and the late ones. Remember when they got the late ones. And more sports history back on the wall. There's that picture of Mr. and Mrs. Brown. We were talking about her earlier this morning. That's Mace Brown's mother and his parents. He was a famous baseball player. And then over here are bunches of letter jackets and uniforms. Oh, and Ron Van Berkham's coaching shirt. That's very important. That's the shrine to Ron Van Berkham. He's still alive. He moved from our fair state to Wisconsin. There's about English Valley Archery. Kinross basketball. I don't know if they can hear me on all this. Kinross basketball back there. There's the scoreboard from the auditorium. It used to be the high school. Now it's the elementary gym. Amy Andreessen had that. And then all sorts of buttons and things from the years, over the years. Different buttons, and there's just so much here to see. Yeah, Mark Claypool's letter jacket was back there. A story about gymnastics, track. Over here, there's more. This is where they have coffee back here. And there's a lounge, and there's quite a bit. There's a Millersburg area with articles from DRM, because DRM's part of the English Valleys too. There's photograph albums. There's just so much to see. This came from the theater.
The tickets.
Tickets, I believe. Well, maybe not. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe that was something. Maybe that was something else. Oh, that's the old auditorium. Excuse me, I'm wrong. I thought that was theater. It's the old auditorium. Okay, I was wrong about that. In this room is more pictures. We're back out to the front room now. Oh yeah. In the corner is the telephone exchange. Yeah, the operator was blind. And then we have this huge mosaic that was made in Iowa City at the VA hospital. And we're going to explore it in depth later too. And this memorial bench was made by Mike Blaylock, or excuse me,
Bucher.
Made by Mike Bucher in honor of Gary Blaylock. And back over here are even more pictures from the 1950s, from the centennial time. And the big fire, we're going to talk about it real soon. And then here's the book stand and the coat rack and the front desk and the railroad sign. So we're going to go back to the main room again now, and I'm going to finish up the end of the broadcast. As you know, we've set up a channel on YouTube where the podcast can be viewed. That's easier than hunting on my Facebook page for the broadcast. So far, we have had over 400 views on YouTube. They're archived by the date of broadcast. We invite you to subscribe, like, and share, and tell your friends. Subscribing to YouTube is free, by the way. We will continue to be on Facebook each week. Funding for the History Center comes from Iowa County 100 Plus Who Care and from the Iowa County Community Foundation. However, we welcome your donations to keep the heat and lights on. Please send donations to the English Valley History Center, P.O. Box 70, North English, Iowa 52316. Scott and Bonnie Romine are working on a set of programs for 2025, which will be announced very soon. Scott Romine posted a schedule for the alumni reunion at the History Center for during North English Fun Days on Saturday, July 26th. There is a flyer on the EV Graduates page if you need more information about when different decades of classes will meet. Please join that page. The parade is at 10:30 a.m. Starting at noon, snacks and drinks will be available at the History Center, paid for by the sales of the Every Wanted EV book for 2025, with pictures of all the graduates since 1957. I will be doing a live broadcast before the parade at 9 a.m. and staying out around after the parade to visit with other alumni. We're also interested in learning about historical English Valley's items that you might wish to donate to the History Center. Please contact Dave Jackson, Scott Romine, or any board member to donate. Thanks for your time, and we'll see you next week. Goodbye. Touch it.
Cut.